January 17, 1910. A winter morning settles over a narrow street in Cleveland, Ohio. Snow darkened by coal soot clings to the edges of wooden sidewalks. Inside a brick row house, a coal stove ticks softly as heat spreads through the kitchen. A woman pours boiling water over coarse ground coffee, its aroma filling the room. On the table sit thick slices of bread, baked the day before, and a dish of lard saved carefully from the previous week's roast. Outside, factory whistles announce the start of the workday. Inside, breakfast is brief, practical, and filling. Food here is not about choice or pleasure. It is about endurance. Across the United States at the opening of the 20th century, what Americans ate was shaped by geography, income, tradition, and necessity. Meals were determined by what could be grown, preserved, purchased, or carried home after long hours of labor. This was a nation still close to its agricultural roots, yet increasingly drawn into industrial life, where diet became a quiet record of work, class, and survival. At the turn of the century, the United States remained largely rural. In 1900, roughly 40% of Americans lived on farms, and many more resided in small towns tied to agriculture. Food production was local and seasonal. Fresh meat was consumed shortly after slaughter. Vegetables followed the calendar of planting and harvest. Preservation was essential. Canning, pickling, salting, smoking, and drying were everyday practices, passed down through families rather than taught in institutions. In farm households, meals were substantial and repetitive. Breakfast often included eggs, salt pork or bacon, biscuits or cornbread, and strong coffee. Dinner, eaten at midday, was the largest meal, built around meat when available, accompanied by potatoes, beans, cabbage, or turnips. Supper was lighter, commonly bread, leftovers, and milk. These patterns reflected the physical demands of agricultural labor and the limited means of storage before widespread refrigeration. In urban centers, the story was different. Cities expanded rapidly between 1900 and 1930, drawing millions into tenements and boarding houses. Immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe brought their own food traditions, adapting them to American ingredients and constraints. Italian families relied on pasta, bread, tomatoes, and olive oil when possible, substituting lard or cheaper fats when necessary. Jewish households followed kosher laws, shaping not only what was eaten but how food was prepared and purchased. Eastern European stews, German sausages, Irish potatoes, and Scandinavian fish dishes became part of the urban food landscape. Yet poverty placed strict limits on diet. Investigations by social reformers and government agencies in the first decade of the century documented widespread malnutrition among working-class families. Meat was expensive. Fresh fruit was often considered a luxury. Bread, potatoes, beans, and cheap cuts of meat formed the backbone of the urban diet. Milk, frequently unpasteurized and unsafe, was both essential and dangerous, particularly for children. By 1908, cities such as Chicago and New York began expanding milk inspection programs in response to high infant mortality. Food safety itself was a national concern. In 1906, Upton Sinclair's publication of The Jungle exposed unsanitary conditions in Chicago's meatpacking plants. Public reaction was swift. That same year, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act, marking the first significant federal involvement in regulating what Americans consumed. These laws did not transform diets overnight, but they altered public awareness. Food became a matter not only of sustenance, but of trust in institutions and industry. As the nation moved into the 1910s, technological change slowly reached American kitchens. Iceboxes became more common in middle-class homes, allowing limited refrigeration through blocks of ice delivered by hand. Gas stoves began replacing wood and coal in cities, offering cleaner and more controllable cooking. Packaged foods, once rare, entered grocery shelves. Canned vegetables, condensed milk, baking powder, and boxed cereals promised convenience and consistency. Advertisements framed these products as modern, scientific, and hygienic. The outbreak of war in Europe in 1914 did not immediately alter American diets, but it reshaped global food markets. By the time the United States entered the conflict in April 1917, food had become a strategic resource. The federal government established the United States Food Administration under Herbert Hoover, urging citizens to conserve staples for troops and allies. Wheatless Mondays, meatless Tuesdays, and porkless Saturdays were promoted through posters, pamphlets, and school programs. Americans were encouraged to eat more corn, oats, and barley, and to substitute fish or vegetables for meat. Victory gardens spread across cities and towns, turning vacant lots into sources of fresh produce. These changes were framed as voluntary, but social pressure was strong. Food choices became expressions of patriotism. The war years introduced the idea that individual diets could serve national goals, a concept that would persist long after the armistice in 1918. When the war ended, the 1920s ushered in a period of economic expansion for many Americans. Rising incomes, mass production, and improved transportation broadened access to food. Refrigerators, now powered by electricity, began to replace iceboxes in urban homes. Chain grocery stores expanded, offering standardized products at lower prices. White bread made from refined flour became a symbol of modernity, replacing darker, coarser loaves once common. The American breakfast changed notably during this decade. Ready-to-eat cereals, promoted as healthy and efficient, gained popularity. Orange juice, previously uncommon due to spoilage, became widely available through improved rail transport and refrigeration. Coffee remained central, while bacon and eggs, once occasional, were increasingly marketed as daily staples. Advertising played a growing role in shaping taste, presenting food as part of an aspirational lifestyle rather than mere nourishment. Yet prosperity was uneven. Rural areas and minority communities often saw little benefit from economic growth. In the South, sharecropping families subsisted on monotonous diets heavy in cornmeal, molasses, and salt pork. African American households, constrained by segregation and poverty, relied on foods that were inexpensive and filling, developing regional cuisines rooted in necessity. These diets provided calories, but often lacked essential nutrients, contributing to widespread deficiencies documented by public health officials in the 1920s. The stock market crash of October 1929 marked a sharp break. As the Great Depression deepened, food scarcity returned as a defining feature of American life. Unemployment rose rapidly, and millions struggled to afford basic meals. Breadlines appeared in cities. Soup kitchens, often run by churches or charities, served thin stews made from donated vegetables and bones. For many families, meals shrank to one or two per day. Government surveys from the early 1930s revealed diets stripped to essentials. Flour, cornmeal, beans, rice, and potatoes dominated. Meat consumption fell sharply. Milk intake declined despite its recognized importance, as prices remained beyond reach for the poorest households. Children suffered disproportionately, prompting concern among educators and physicians. School lunch programs, initially local and uneven, began to emerge as a response to hunger rather than convenience. In rural America, the Depression compounded existing hardships. Falling crop prices meant farmers often grew food they could not sell. Paradoxically, hunger existed alongside surplus. Families consumed what they could produce, relying heavily on preserved foods from previous seasons. The Dust Bowl years intensified these challenges. In the Great Plains, drought and soil erosion destroyed crops, forcing families to abandon farms and migrate west. Their diets on the road were minimal. Bread, beans, occasional fruit, whatever could be obtained cheaply or shared. Federal intervention expanded during the New Deal. Programs such as the Federal Surplus Relief Corporation distributed excess commodities to the needy, including flour, canned meat, dried beans, and powdered milk. While limited in variety, these foods prevented starvation and established a direct link between agricultural policy and household diets. Food was no longer solely a private concern. It had become a matter of national responsibility. By the late 1930s, scientific understanding of nutrition had advanced significantly. Vitamins had been identified, and deficiency diseases such as pellagra and rickets were better understood. Nutrition guidelines began influencing public policy and education. Some foods were fortified, including flour enriched with B vitamins and iron. These measures subtly altered what Americans ate, embedding scientific intervention into everyday meals. As the nation approached the 1940s, the memory of hunger remained close. When war again engulfed Europe and Asia, American food systems were better prepared. Rationing during World War II would later shape diets profoundly, but even before formal restrictions, Americans carried forward habits learned through scarcity, thrift, substitution, and respect for food's value. Throughout the first 4 decades of the 20th century, what Americans ate reflected the pressures of their time. Diets recorded the shift from farm to factory, from local to national markets, from tradition to regulation. Meals bore the marks of immigration, war, economic collapse, and recovery. Food revealed class divisions and regional identities, while also showing common threads of adaptation and endurance. In kitchens across the country, from city apartments to rural farmhouses, Americans prepared meals shaped by forces far beyond the table. Each loaf of bread, each pot of beans, each preserved jar told a quiet story of labor, constraint, and survival. By understanding what people ate during the 1900s in America, the everyday act of eating becomes a record of a nation learning how to feed itself in a rapidly changing world.